My name is Michael DeLand, and I'm the Director of College Relations here at Clear Creek Baptist Bible College. We are back once again to spotlight the classes that we teach here at Clear Creek. And with me once again today, I have Dr. John Diddy, who teaches Old Testament courses in Hebrew. And today we'll be talking about Old Testament courses 5, 6, 7, and 8. And so, Dr. John, if you would, just kind of give us a brief introduction to those Old Testament courses.
I will, and I appreciate being able to do this. I love talking about what I do here. I love what the Lord's called me here to do. A little catch up, 1 through 4 is the history stuff. So when you move to 5 through 8, all of those books will actually connect somewhere into those first 4.
Yeah.
Because you have prophets, you have wisdom literature. And so what we have is we have 3 semesters where we look at the prophetic material, the different prophets. And then 1 semester we look at the poetry and books of wisdom and writings. In Old Testament 5, we look at Isaiah and all his contemporary minor prophets. So you have Isaiah, he has 6 contemporary minor prophets. We look at 5 of those because of time. I take one of them and I drop it over in Old Testament 6 because the material in Obadiah really isn't datable to any particular era. It can match actually 5 years in Israelite history. And so if you're going to pick one, just throw that one over there. It's, we're not very scientific or theological in the reason, just needed to move one. But what we do in Old Testament 5 is we start by first looking at an overview of Hebrew prophets and prophecy. It's a different genre. It's not the same when you're looking at 1 through 4. Most of those you're looking at a style of literature called historic narrative and storytelling. Yeah. But historic narrative they aren't myths. It's actual stories. You take them at face value. Well, when you come into the prophets, then you're in a different genre. You're in prose and poetry. And so what we need to do is say, okay, what was it? What makes Hebrew prophecy distinct? What are the themes? Yeah. What was the calling of the prophet? And so we look at that, and we'll also look at the eras of the prophets as an overview. Isaiah's era, Jeremiah, Post-Exilic, and then Post-Exilic, and what was distinct in those eras as far as what was going on in society, what was going on in the religious system, those type of things. Well, once we do that, and that takes maybe 4 class periods to do that, then we'll get into Isaiah. And of course, Isaiah, it's often called the Bible in miniature. It's the same number of chapters as we have books in the Bible. Yeah. And the themes of Isaiah are just amazing. And so we can't really do a comprehensive look. That's an elective. But what I'll do is we'll look at the opening chapters. We'll look at his temple sermon, chapter 1. And then I'll jump to 3 or 4 other chapters. Then we look at the messianic passages. And I'll do all of those because there's 8 or 9, and we'll look at 6 of them. Yeah. Because we have a lot of other books we have to cover. And we'll do that. And then I'll look at a couple others toward the end. And there's some I would love to add. Like we don't do the new heaven and new earth. That's not new with John. He says that in the Revelation, and Isaiah said it at the end of his book too. Oh, wow. Talk about the new heaven or the new earth. And we just don't have time to do that. So we do Isaiah, and that gives us really a good look at both the history and the message of God, and what was different between Isaiah's message over against Jeremiah's message, because they're both prophets and they're both major prophets. And then from there we go into the minor prophets. For his year, we do Hosea, Amos, Joel, Micah, and Jonah. Yeah. And of course, a couple of those were distinct to the northern kingdom. Hosea and Amos, they do their work in the northern kingdom. So we get into that and what's going on in the northern kingdom. And in the smaller books, we do tend to cover them a little more completely, which the students like. It's amazing to me. I'm doing this for a lot of years, but it always still amazes me of how little some of these books are even looked at. Yeah. We might know a little. We know from Hosea, we know Gomer. Right. And we don't realize from chapter 4 to chapter 13, we're looking at the northern kingdom spiral out of control to destruction. And it all starts with a lack of knowledge of God. and ends with total idolatry. But then how God's gracious in chapter 14 and reaches out to his people. But so we're able to go through those books a little more thoroughly, and then to look at a book like Jonah and realize it is so different from all the other prophets because it's a story, it's a narrative.
That's right.
And I think a high point in Jonah is it ends with a question. You know, when God says to Jonah, you know, you cared about the vine, shouldn't I care about this city? And then God doesn't answer that. And I think he leaves it wide open because he wants us to.
Yes.
And so that's Old Testament 5. And it's the era of Isaiah. Then the next era we jump about 100 years or so. We go to the time of Jeremiah and his contemporaries. He only has 3 actual contemporary minor prophets, and that's Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we put Obadiah in there as well.
Just because.
Just because. We had to put it somewhere.
Yeah.
We're not going to leave him out. But again, when you start, you're starting a whole new era. And so we go back and we background that era again. What's the difference between Isaiah's day and Jeremiah's day? Yeah. Because it's a big difference. And I've been in ministry for a long time. I started preaching back in the early 1980s. And what I've noticed in my time working with local churches and my time teaching Old Testament is in our own national history, we're moving through the eras of the prophets. When I first started preaching, we were more living in the day of Isaiah, where the biggest problems were social issues, inequity, stuff like that. And it was having some effect on God's people, especially in the north. It always did, but in the south, you know, they had their moments, but they still had good moments with God. But when you come to the days of Jeremiah, social issues are still an issue, but that's mostly because they become apostate. You know, they have turned their back on God. Yes, wow. And when you get into Jeremiah, the northern kingdom has been gone for 100 years, and but you know, I look and say, gosh, I told our class not long ago, you know, guys, I used to think we were living more in Isaiah's day, but I think we're not living more in Jeremiah's day. And if that's true, then that's scary.
Sad narrative.
Yeah, because that means we're getting close to judgment. You know?
Yes.
But we look at Jeremiah, and again, like Isaiah, it's such a big book. We look at main stories, and Jeremiah's got some distinctive stories. He has 7 stories, or 6 stories that we call the living parables. He actually acted them out. You know, go to the potter's house and watch him make pottery.
That's right. Yeah.
Those type stories, and we look at those. We look at you know, the theme of God's judgment, because that's the major theme of Jeremiah. And one of the saddest words in Jeremiah, it shows up 3 times in the first 7 chapters, where it says, God says to the prophet, do not pray for these people because I will not listen.
Wow.
Now that doesn't sound godlike to me at all. I mean, Jesus saying, no, don't pray because I'm not going to listen to you. But God tells the prophet, listen, I'm done. You know, they have crossed the line. Now that doesn't mean that God was throwing them away, because he also says to Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, who's a contemporary of Jeremiah, but a different place, he says, you know, my people will always be my people. They'll quit being my people when the sun, moon, and stars quit doing what they do. Yeah. And that's, to the Jewish thought, they'll always be around. So they were still God's people. But he had said, I am done. And the nation pretty much was finished. There would be a remnant. Wow. But they were going to exile. Nothing was going to stop the exile. I mean, God had given them 2 great awakenings with Hezekiah and Josiah. That's right. And Jeremiah's ministry begins at the beginning of Josiah's reform. You know, Josiah's into the reform like 1 year when Jeremiah called him into his prophetic ministry. And then when you look at Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah, it's Nahum just talking mostly about Nineveh. Okay, but Habakkuk and Zephaniah are talking about what God's about to do. And Habakkuk is an unusual book in that really what we have in Habakkuk is the prophet's conversation with God and God's not. There's 3 prayers. There's 2 prayers in chapters 1 and 2, and chapter 3 is a prayer, but it is a prayer that could be used in temple worship. It's a song. But what we have in Habakkuk are, you know, he just stirring, God, why are you doing this? Why I understand the judgment. Why the Babylonians?
Right.
And man, how many of us have ever asked God, I understand why you're doing this to me, but why are you using that person? And so it's a very honest book. And what we see in Habakkuk is it's okay to ask God questions.
Yes. Yes.
And then Zephaniah, of the three minor prophets, he is probably the most uplifting. He has a pretty strong word, but he ends with a wonderful point of grace, just as Habakkuk does. And so that's Old Testament. Let's see, that was 6. Old Testament 7 is Ezekiel and Daniel, Haggai, Zachary, and Malachi. Now, Ezekiel and Jeremiah are contemporaries, but we see Ezekiel as an exilic prophet because he's in Babylon, same time period, though, which is fun to do that crossover. When Ezekiel goes in Ezekiel 8, God takes him in a vision to the temple. You realize that's the temple that Jeremiah is preaching.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But we look at those, and again, what was different? What was the ministry of Jeremiah? What was the ministry of Daniel? Because it's a whole different world for him now.
Right.
And so we look at that, and with Ezekiel, we see God puts him there 5 years before people start coming, so that he's got it in his own heart. He's got to work through what's happening.
Right.
And so God prepared him for that ministry, which is an encouragement for me.
Amen.
That God prepares us for what we do. And then we go from there, we look at Daniel, a totally different ministry.
Yes.
And of course you have those 6 wonderful stories in the first 6 chapters. Those are just classics. But then you get into some of the
prophecy,
some of the best prophetic, stuff that we're thinking of in the eschaton, in the end times, because even though Daniel sees, he sees the Persian, the Greek, the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. He sees that kingdom that goes beyond that. And Daniel saw stuff that if he was allowed to write them down, we'd pinpoint Jesus coming back.
We would.
But he wasn't allowed to. And so you have that. But Daniel, to me, one of the high points in Daniel comes in chapter 12, when he speaks of a resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous. First time in the Old Testament that there's a differentiation. In the Old Testament, you had Sheol, the realm of the dead. By the day of Daniel, they understood that the realm of the dead held more than just dead people. It held righteous and unrighteous. And he said there'd be a resurrection of the unrighteous to judgment and the righteous to reward. And so we have that picture. It's the veil is God's. By the time Jesus comes, they understand that. But Daniel mentions that at the close of his book, which I think is amazing. And then you have 3 post-exilic prophets, Haggai, Zachary, and Malachi, which they're all helping us understand what was going on in that period. And it's sad because in Haggai, God has that wonderful question. You say it's not time for God's house to be rebuilt, but why are you living in paneled houses? They were neglecting what God had sent them back there to do. And so he deals with that, the rebuilding of the temple. And then jumping to Malachi. Malachi, the religious system's working, but it's not working well. They're giving bad sacrifices. He has that one phrase, I think in chapter 1 or 2, try giving that offering to your governor, see if he'd want it. But we see that Malachi, being many believe the close of the Old Testament year, about 400 BC, that they weren't into idolatry. They learned that lesson in Babylon. Don't worship idols. But they still were struggling with pure worship of God. And then Zechariah, nestled between the two, he is the Isaiah of the post-exilic period. He has more to say about Messiah than any other prophet than Isaiah.
Zechariah 9:9.
Oh, Zechariah is loaded. One of my favorites is, I think it's chapter 3, verse 9 or 10, where it talks about the sin of the nation being removed in a single day.
Wow.
And I ask students, what's he talking about? How's the sin of the nation being removed in a single day? Well, when Jesus said it was finished,
yes,
the sin was removed.
It was removed.
A single moment.
Yeah.
And so here is Zechariah talking so much about the messianic ministry.
Wow.
And so that finishes Old Testament 7. Okay? Old Testament 8, we drop back to the middle and we look at Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon, along with Lamentations, the poetry. And I throw Lamentations in there because Lamentations is made up of 5 songs. It's that style of literature. And we look at the various flow of Job. And Job is a great book, but it's a tough one.
It is.
It really is. Because, you got to realize that the guys, his friends had some pretty good advice, but most of it was really wretched. And Job was struggling.
Yes.
But when you look at it, Job isn't about the suffering of Job. Job is about the sovereignty of God.
That's right.
Because at the end, Job never does find out why it happened to him. He does get blessed.
Yes, he does.
And the big eye opener in that one is at the end. It says, God gave him double everything. And I'll ask the students. I say, did God double everything that he lost? And they'll say, well, no. He gave him 10 children again. But no, he didn't double his kids. And I said, oh, wait a minute. Aren't people eternal? So didn't he double Job's children?
Sure did.
Because even though his first 10 are gone, they're dead, it doesn't mean that he wouldn't someday get be with them.
Yeah.
And so we have Job, then Psalms. I do overview, what the Psalms are, how they were used, different types of Psalms. And then because of time, we look at maybe half a dozen. And my quip with the students is, I'm going to look at my favorite ones. When it's time for you to teach this class, you can look at your favorite ones. But I try to do a selection of the Psalms, different types of Psalms to look at. But I do pick out my favorite ones. Then we look at Proverbs, which is harder to teach than Psalms. But what I'll do is we do again, what type of literature are Proverbs, and why are they so good? And what's new about Proverbs is Jesus is the ultimate teacher. He uses Proverbs.
Yes.
And different things. But with Proverbs, what I'll do is I'll look at 10 different categories. Laziness, relationships with your family, immorality. The different things when you have these different categories you find.
Yeah.
I'll do 10 different categories. We then move to Ecclesiastes, which is one of my favorites. It's very contemporary because it's the answer to folks who think you can find life on this side of the sun. And the writer of Ecclesiastes, I believe, is Solomon, and there's a discussion about that.
Sure.
But he reminds us that there's nothing new under the sun, and there really is there isn't anything lasting under the sun. We have to find our life above the sun.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it very much points to God. And then in Ecclesiastes, never read the last chapter until you've got, discouraged reading the first 11 chapters and even almost all of the 12th chapter, because, he's struggling and it is hard. This guy's, Chuck Swindoll says he thinks it's the journal of a man on a midlife crisis.
That makes sense. Yes.
But at the end, he tells us the answer to it. And the answer is to love God.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the one that students come in very quietly is Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon.
Yes.
And the good thing is, we're adults here, and we look at the different ways that the song has been interpreted. I personally believe it's God showing us how a husband and wife ought to treat one another, and how He's the perfect example of that. Yeah. And so we do Song of Songs. That's usually a one-day one. 100 minutes. And we do a lot of laughing and getting red-faced. But God doesn't hide it, and how marriages ought to be and how husband and wife ought to treat them is so important in the day we live in. Yes. And a lot of our students now, we have a lot of single students, more than I can remember in the years that I've been here. And so I get a chance to say, guys, now learn this now, because before you get married, it'll help so much. And then the last one we'll look at is Lamentations, which is an eyewitness account of Jerusalem after the destruction, probably written by Jeremiah. Very sad book, but right in the middle of it is that great passage of hope gosh, I'm going to lose it now. Every once in a while I have these moments. But it talks about God's faithfulness. God's faithfulness is new. God's goodness is new every morning. So God, great is thy faithfulness. So that's right in the middle of all this destruction. But a reminder that God hasn't given up. Because whether you're looking at Old Testament 1 or all the way through Old Testament 8, it's not God telling the story of man, it's God telling his story. And how he reaches humanity in all of our situations. And he does it in a lot of different ways, whether it's through history, stories of history, or poems or sermons. But he's constantly reminding us that his plan was always Messiah.
Amen.
And I'll take him to Revelation, where it's talking about Antichrist, but in it says it was the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
Wow.
And so from the time the foundation of the world is talking about when Jesus said, let there be light.
Yeah.
Jesus is the creator, according to John chapter 1. And so we're reminded in the Revelation that Jesus was always the plan. Even before he created us, he knew he'd die for us. Now, what kind of love is that?
Wow, it's
he could have said, I don't think I want to do this because if it's going to end like that, no. He knew it.
Yeah.
And he was the creator. And then he was willing to come and die for his creation. That's the story of the Old Testament.
Wow.
That's Old Testament 1 through 8.
Yeah. Well,
that's it.
That is fantastic. And it reminds me, one of the values that we offer here at Clear Creek is many Christian degrees will give you overviews. So you'll get the Old Testament in 1 or 2 classes, and the New Testament in 1 or 2 classes, or surveys is what they call them. We do 8 courses in each Old Testament and New Testament. Of course, Dr. John here teaches 8 in the Old Testament. He's given us just a sample of what you would get in 6, 7, and 8, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And so if you're interested in these courses, I would encourage you to reach out to us. You'll see that information at the end of this video. Also, I want to remind you that you can take these classes online or on campus. We prefer on campus because that's where you get the best experience by far. But if you absolutely cannot come, you can take these courses online. The online platform is fantastic. And so just know that there is there for you as well. Dr. John, I want to thank you once again for sharing your time with us. And you can clearly see that he has a passion for the Old Testament. For 30 years, he's been teaching this. And so you'll be blessed if you come to campus and take these courses. With that, we're going to say thank you for joining us and good day.